Thank you for listening to Offline and Unfiltered. We are your hosts, Lakisha and Megan.
On this podcast, we bring you unfiltered conversations on business and culture through listener stories, expert interviews, and a little bit of shit talking. Welcome, listeners, to this episode of Offline and Unfiltered. We are so excited to have Lauren Lefkowitz with us today. Lauren, would you mind giving our listeners an introduction?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. I'm Lauren Lefkowitz. I'm an executive coach, and I believe that fine is a trap. Fine is the thing that we do. It's the thing that we say when things are decidedly not fine, but we have to self-soothe and tell ourselves it's fine. So we say, it's fine that I have to work all these extra hours. Someday I'll get a promotion. It's fine that I have so many direct reports that I can't breathe. They made me a vice president. It's fine that I don't like my job. This is the career I chose. And we're really not fine, but we don't know how else to act. And so we live in this place where we've settled for some sort of mediocre because we think it's all we can have. And I work with professionals, executives, emerging executives to help them figure out, first of all, what they actually want, because we forget that we're still allowed to choose when we're grown-ups. And secondly, how to actually go after it and have the career and life that they want.
Well, thank you, Lauren. We are so excited to have you on today. And so I would love to just kind of start out a little bit about your journey and how you got to this very place of being an executive coach and really being able to pivot away from the fine definition of life.
Yeah. So I think when we really dig in and choose our careers, we're often, and especially in my case, choosing to help the people who we've been. And so I come from a background in HR. I was a 20-year HR professional in a bunch of different industries. I was a hand raiser. I was invited into all of the rooms, which at first was really flattering and then became sort of overbearing and then became compulsive. And so at the height of my career, I was a vice president reporting directly to the CEO. I was interim managing several departments at all different times and working 80 to 100 hours a week and making it look easy. I had no life outside of work. I also live with a bunch of chronic illnesses that started in my early 30s. And I was hiding those. I didn't want anybody to think or know that I was sick, because if they thought or knew I was sick, they might think or know that I couldn't keep up, and I didn't want to look incapable. And so I just kept at it. And one day I decided things needed to change. I didn't know how, I didn't know what. And I went on a cleaning spree in my home, and I cleaned out every closet. I organized my underwear by color. I donated a bunch of stuff. I hand washed the baseboards. And when I was all done with it, and I thought, this is my moment. This is where I figure out what I want my career to be like, how I set boundaries, all of that kind of stuff. I had an accident in my home where I was chasing my Roomba vacuum, which was doing its cleaning job, and going towards an unplugged glass lamp cord. And I thought the glass would shatter, disaster would strike. And so I ran to catch the Roomba. And instead of catching the Roomba, I slid in my socks on my wood floor, launched forward, broke both of my shoulders, and was out of the hand-raising game, which was my friend's favorite joke, that I could no longer be a hand raiser because my shoulders didn't allow me to raise my hands. So as funny as that scenario is, and as tragic as it is, it was actually the trigger for all of the changes that I eventually made. I was out of work for 4 months. I slowly integrated myself back in and went right back to that 80-hour work week because I had no plan for how I wanted things to change. And then I finally hit the wall and I realized I didn't want to live like this. I didn't want to look back on my life and say, I sure worked hard. And all this time I'd had this side gig of coaching that had happened organically. And I had made an assumption and a decision that I couldn't do it full time, that I wouldn't make money doing it full time. And the truth was, I had decided that. So, of course, it was my truth. And when I started talking to other people about it and started talking about what I actually wanted, right? Like secretly what I actually wanted and thought I couldn't have, everybody said to me, of course you can have that. Of course you can. And I started to realize that I was the one holding me back. I was the one deciding what I couldn't have and how things had to be. And I hired my own executive coach, which I had never done before. And she helped me over a several month period learn to set boundaries, learn to figure out like what I wanted, how I wanted things to be. And in 2021, I left my corporate career and launched my business full time. And I've been doing it now almost 3 years, and I just love it. And I feel really fortunate that I was willing to learn to receive support and not try to do everything by myself and convince myself of what I wasn't allowed to have.
Thanks for sharing that, Lauren. So there's a few things that just really resonated with me. And, you shared early on, raising your hand and that, ability to no longer raise your hand. And then also always having a seat at the table or being invited to every meeting. And so those are really indicative of achievers, right? And the desire to achieve some sort of status or level. And so I'm just curious if you could just talk to our listeners a little bit more about the curse of the achiever and how that really impacts one's ability to choose themselves or choose a career path.
The typical path that I see for the achiever is this real excitement about what could be early on. And when you get noticed, when you're an achiever and you're early in your career and you get noticed for doing something well, there's an ego boost, there's a confidence build, and you become addicted to being invited into the room. So early in my career, I was in HR, but I started getting invited into operational meetings. I started getting invited into meetings that, were cross-functional with marketing and other departments. And I was so proud of myself. And I think that's the achiever's fuel, is to be able to be proud of yourself because external validation says you did it. You're good at this. You achieved, you completed something. And the more rooms I got invited into, the more excited I got and the busier I got. And I think as achievers, we're climbing up this mountain and it's this like real upward. We look out at the scenery and we can't believe we're this high up and we can't believe how great this is. And then we fall off a cliff because we're tired. We're so tired. We just cannot do any more things. And the curse is that we don't know how to back out of any of it. So we think that if we say no to anything, we're going to be seen as lazy, as not a team player, maybe as incapable, maybe as checked out, quiet quitting, disengaged, all of those kinds of things. And so we keep at it. And in my case, and in a lot of my clients' case, there's this imagined perception that we are there's this imagined perception that we will stop being invited into everything if we say no to anything. And we also think that people think that we're not that busy because we make it look easy. So if we say no to something, that we're worried the perception will be, well, what else are you working on? And then we're going to have to explain ourselves.
That's so true, Lauren. It's so true. And I think there's such a trap. I mean, I have a lot of beef with LinkedIn for a lot of reasons, but I think that there's a lot of, especially in the HR space, there's a lot of these like quote unquote influencers out there where they talk a lot about, to show that you add value in an HR space, you have to have a seat at the table. You have to be a strategic partner, which is like my favorite buzzword, right? To all the departments and show your value cross-functionally rather than just being good at your job, right? And I think for folks like us that fall into careers like HR, recruiting, or more like people-centric careers, we fall into this trap of pleasing. Like, I want to please everybody. I want everybody to like me. I think that that's a big trap for, like, especially HR folks, is like, if I'm not seen as approachable, likable, relatable, all those things, then they won't invite me into these rooms. And then I'm just stuck writing policies. Like, I don't get to do the fun stuff. And I'm just curious, Lauren, in your experience, like, how did you personally kind of shift your mindset of, I don't need to be in every meeting. I don't need to be on every project. I don't need to know everything that's happening. I'm just curious about that.
Well, first, let me say that I really still enjoy being liked. It's my favorite. And I think as a pleaser and an achiever, you just never lose that. And that's not the goal, right? It's not the goal to say, like, go ahead and hate me. I don't care. That's not real life, right? And also, I really desire to be liked. I think I'm pretty likable. I'm like a good listener and I'm pretty fun to be around. And it breaks my heart a little bit when somebody doesn't like me. So part of the achiever-pleaser combination, and not everybody who's an achiever is a pleaser and vice versa, right? But the combination of achiever and pleaser makes it so that you have to learn to be okay with having your heart broken. So it's not that you have to learn to not be a pleaser or that you have to learn to say, like, whatever, people can hate me. It's that you have to learn to cope with people not liking you because you're making decisions that are better for you, better for your department, your team, like whoever you're trying to make things better for. So the curse of the achiever, the curse of the people pleaser leads you to learning to boundary set and say no in a way that feels constructive to you.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, really the power of no, right? And so early on, you said the curse of how to back out of it. And so being transparent with our listeners, I'm going through a journey right now where I'm assimilating to boundaries and really trying to balance this achiever that's ingrained in me from childhood. And so, Megan will tell you, the first step was like, okay, I'm leaving at 5:00. And so that naturally set some no's, right? Because maybe people were used to having access to me at 6:30 or, me creating a meeting at 5 p.m. And so I am really curious for myself as well as our listeners, how do you go about really setting that new tone, right? And establishing those boundaries and being able to say no in a tasteful way?
You start really, really slowly. So the boundary that you're talking about is a great boundary to start with. Every day I'm leaving at 5. Some days you may have to go back on that if there's an emergency or something like that. Some days you may start work a little bit earlier so that you can make sure to leave at 5. But if you go from being a person who picks up your phone first thing in the morning, it's the first thing you do before you say good morning to your dog or your cat or your partner, your phone is in your face. That is your partner, right? If that's your way, and then you don't end your day until you're getting into bed at night, to turn around and say, sorry, suckers, I only work from 9 to 5 now, and you can't access me outside of work hours. That's, first of all, not going to work for your employer because that's such an abrupt turnaround. And it's not going to be sustainable for you because you can't just flip a switch and be different. You have to start testing things. You have to start seeing what works, what resonates. You have to start trusting that as you're making changes, they're actually going to stick. So I had one client who, and I love this story. She said to me, I don't even get to drink my coffee in peace. She has 2 little ones at home. She had work calling her from the second she got up in the morning, or from the second her coworkers got up in the morning, because she was up before them. And she had her husband at home, and everybody was bustling and trying to get ready for the day. And she just couldn't get her coffee down her throat. And I said to her, "When are you actually alone in the morning?" And she said, like literally only in the shower. I said, "Cool. Extend your shower time by 5 minutes and bring your coffee to the bathroom." And she was like, "I'm not going to drink coffee in the bathroom." And I said, "Try it." So for a week, she drank coffee in the bathroom. She told me it was the most delicious cup of coffee she'd ever had. And she said, "I want to take it a step further. I want to not have my phone with me when I'm drinking that coffee." So she did that. The next thing she said was, "I told my family that I'm going to go sit out on the porch for 10 minutes every morning and drink my coffee, and I don't want anybody to bother me." Now, if she had started with, "I'm going to drink my coffee on the porch for 10 minutes every day," the family might not have really been into it. But they saw her bringing her coffee to the bathroom. She told them she was going to take an extra 5 minutes. She realized that she really needed that time, and she got brave enough to say, "I'm going to sit out on the porch." Well, it turned out that everybody really liked breakfast on the porch. So as long as everyone was quiet, they all got to have breakfast on the porch. The girls brought books with them. Her husband was sometimes inside, sometimes outside, but it was everybody's quiet time to just sit and listen to nature and be outside. And that was her first step. Eventually, she also got herself down to a 40-hour work week. And it's sort of like a yada, 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 right? Because I could talk all day about this relationship with this particular client. But she started setting those boundaries little by little at work. And if you set those boundaries little by little, if you say no strategically, you get the opportunity to see how that goes, to test it out, to say no in ways that work for you, that also work for the company. And then you get bolder about saying, like, "That's not my department's purview. That's not something I can do. I will be out of the office that week and I won't be reachable." And you get braver and braver until you really feel like you have taken control of the management of your time and your energy.
That's powerful, because I think, in society, we often feel like the control is in yes, but the power is really in no. And so I think that's a mind shift for everyone, right? Because as a kid, right, we're trained that no has a negative connotation, right? No, don't do that. Stop. No, no. And so if we can change that narrative, it's really an empowerment, right? Because you're saying, "No, this doesn't serve me," or "No, I can't commit to this," or "No, I'm putting myself first." So thank you for really kind of lifting that up. And so, one thing you said early on, Lauren, that really resonates with me is how, being an achiever, we make things look easy. And so making things look easy can always be to a detriment of ourselves. And you mentioned earlier you were struggling with some health issues, but at the same time, you made things look easy. And so I want to talk a little bit about some practical tools that we can give our listeners to ask for help or ask for support. And so I'm curious if you can just share how you pivoted to receiving support kind of in your newfound space.
Yeah, I think, that's such a big question. I think the shift to being willing to receive help actually starts with a shift away from thinking you're supposed to know everything. Achievers and people pleasers are super good at reading people, at reading needs, at jumping in when nobody else is jumping in, figuring things out, solving puzzles, avoiding risk or limiting risk. And so we make this assumption that we're supposed to know everything. And if we're the person that helps everybody else all of the time, then we should be able to help ourselves. And if we can't, we must not be helpable. And that is a really difficult realization to come to, that there are other people who can be more clever about us than us. So to start that path, I started networking, and I found other achievers and people pleasers who, like me, had trouble asking for help and also had asked for help. That's right. So we need role models. We need people who can help us figure out what's even wrong, right? Like, I didn't know what was wrong. I just knew I worked 80 to 100 hours a week and I was tired. And I was really good at hiding that. Like you said, I made it look easy, and I couldn't do that anymore. I was tired. I was starting to see it in my face. When I was looking in the Zoom screen, I felt like my skin looked gray. And so I had to hit, and I think this is common with achievers, I had to hit what felt like a breaking point. And it's a shame that we have to hit that point, but I haven't yet met an achiever in any of my clients who wasn't like at the end of the road for themselves, where they're like, I don't know what else to do. I've tried all of the things. And they're ready to trust somebody else. So I had to find somebody who was more clever about me than me. And I stumbled into an HR group, and I hopped on a Zoom with them, and I told all of them I couldn't change anything. And they all said, I mean, you can, you just don't have to do it by yourself. And they were the support that brought me to, oh, I can hire a coach. And that coach, that first coach that I hired, I just needed her to be one step more clever than me, one step ahead of where I was in my own development. And when I said to her, I really want to do this and that and the other thing, but I work so much and that's not going to change. And she said, if you say so. And I felt like my blood boil, like, I was so mad.
Of course you're going to say that. You don't know.
Right?
You don't know how hard it is.
You don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know what it's like. You don't work in a corporate environment. You don't, and all of those feelings went through me very quickly. Even as I'm talking about it now, I get chills because I could feel so viscerally that I was more angry that she was right and I hadn't thought about that than that she was saying it. And I was coaching as a side gig for all of these years. I said the similar things to my clients all the time. And we can't be objective about ourselves. So we have to learn to trust. And that's why, when I talk to people about hiring a coach, I always say hire someone who has, first of all, some coach training, not just that they're good at something and so they became a coach in it, but also somebody who has been through something similar to what you've been through. You don't need that for everything in your life. You don't need that for, I don't think necessarily therapy. I don't think necessarily someone who you're going to for like help learning how to market yourself. But for this particular kind of personal development, if you are trying to shift how you manage your career because you're an achiever and a people pleaser, you need to find a recovering achiever and people pleaser who's a step ahead of you or 10 steps ahead of you, who's going to get what's going on with you. It's kind of like if you want to hire somebody for fitness and you have chronic illness, you don't want to hire somebody who has never experienced illness because they're going to just like encourage you and try to help you overcome and not necessarily understand the mornings when you wake up and your bones hurt. So there are some things where you need a person who has that experience, who can ease you in and not just do like facilitative goal setting and say like, okay, here's what you're going to do. You're going to start working 40 hours a week. You're not going to answer your phone on weekends, because that person's not going to trust that any of this makes sense or any of it is doable.
I just have to plug, Lauren and I met through like a women's networking group. And when I was considering my career shift, I kind of I reached out to you and picked your brain because I was like, I feel like a connection almost. And I remember there are two things you said to me that like still resonate with me. And one was like, don't rage quit your job. I came very close. I don't know that I succeeded, but I think I had more of a plan than I had originally intended on having. And the other was, I remember I had said to you at one point, I was like, I don't know, sometimes I just feel like I'm winging it, man. And you just said, everybody's winging it. Everybody. And like, of course, I know that. But it was so interesting to hear somebody else say it. And it almost like gave me permission to not be a perfectionist, to not know everything, and to just trust myself in a way I don't think I had trusted myself before. So thanks,
Thank
Lauren.
you. Yeah. Yeah. We're all making it up.
To your point, like we're all figuring it out. You don't have to be perfect. I give all of our listeners permission to not be perfect.
And not even be close to perfect. Like don't like and like add perfectionist to my list of things, right? Achiever, people pleaser, perfectionist, suspicious of joy, all of those things. And also, I'm making pretty good guesses. Like we're all winging it, but we're all winging it in a way that whether vaguely or very specifically, we are aiming for something. I'm aiming for a life filled with joy where I help tons of people realize they don't have to settle. That's it. That's like the baseline of everything. So I do the marketing and I do, live shows and I go out on speaking gigs and all of that kind of stuff for the purpose of helping people understand you don't have to get into your 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s and just like suck it up and get through your career. That's not where any joy comes from. And do I have some expertise in that? Yes, personal expertise, coach training. I spent 20 years in HR. Like I could list you all of my credentials. And also I'm like a pretty good guesser at what people are feeling because I've felt it and I've had clients who felt it. I'm a pretty good guesser at if my client says like, I'm going to start doing this and it's a really big chunk of something, I'm pretty good at guessing that that's going to be too big and let's make it smaller. And that's the kind of support that you want in another human, whether it's a coach or a mentor or a constructive friend. And the word constructive is very important there because a commiserating friend is just going to ruin everything for you. But that's what you need in another person is you need to trust that somebody can guess better than you.
So let's talk about the other side of that. Let's talk about, and I'm sure there's listeners as well as us on this podcast today where we have trusted someone, whether it was to support us, to help us navigate terrain we've never been in, and that didn't work out. And so how can you essentially help our listeners kind of get back on the wagon, get back on the bike with trust and knowing that there are people out there who have more foresight, who've been where they are trying to go. And so can you just talk us through that, Lauren?
Yeah, trust is hard, right? Especially if you've been self-reliant for a really long time. I am a person where if I can do it by myself, I will do it by myself. Like the 3-year-old who wants to press the elevator buttons, I can do it. And so I have put together furniture where the instruction guide has a big no sign over the one person doing the building. And I have figured out how to leverage it against my couch and screw the things in. And if you need somebody to build your furniture, call me. I'll probably say no because I have good boundaries now, but I know how to do it. But you have to be willing to try to trust somebody else. So you start with low risk, right? You don't hand over your entire vulnerability to someone right away. You test it. You see how it's working out. You do one thing and you trust that it worked. When I first started setting boundaries at work, I pretty easily, and I say pretty easily because it's in retrospect, it did not feel easy in the moment, but I pretty quickly, let's say, got myself from 80 plus hours a week to 60 plus hours a week. So that was probably about a 3-month path. And then I realized I couldn't hit another level of boundaries without involving my CEO and asking for his help and support. And I did not want to do it because I didn't trust that he would be okay with it, which had nothing to do with him. He's the best boss I've ever had. I didn't trust that I would be seen as doing enough if I came in and said, I'm working 60 hours, because I just sort of assumed everybody was working at least 60 hours, which wasn't the case. So I worked up my nerve. I practiced my conversation, and I told him what I had done already in boundary setting, and I told him what I was looking to do in boundary setting. And I asked him for very specific help. And for me, that felt like I was building a level of trust with him in asking him for support and help. But I wasn't just going in blindly saying like, ooh, help me, because I wouldn't have gotten anything out of that. I wouldn't have felt productive doing that. For me, being looked at as strong is very important and remains important. And so for me, it's that balance of strength and vulnerability. So ask for something really specific, and you can do something really, really small, right? I had one client who decided she wasn't going to check her phone first thing in the morning, and she felt like she couldn't do that unless she told her boss she was not going to do that. And she got to the point where she sent her boss a message and said, I'm not going to be checking my phone from 7 to 7:15 every morning. If it's an emergency, please text me. And she set her text tone to, a special tone just for that boss. Boss never texted her because they respected the boundary. She didn't say like, I'm never going to be available outside of work hours. She eventually got to that. But start small, build the trust small, and then you can start building it up. So when I went to this boss and I said, I've been working a lot of hours, I didn't tell him how many. And I said, I'm trying to build some boundaries and I need to be less involved in different department things. So I've already pulled myself out of this, and that, and made sure that those people had what they needed. But I need your help in pulling out of these things. And he said, okay, that sounds good. You've got my support, and helped me figure out where some things could move. And the next day, there was a meeting that I was not in that I had said no to. And it was to reset the phone tree in the company. I wasn't even on the phone tree. HR hides behind everything, that, right? I wasn't even on the phone tree. And I declined the meeting and I said, I don't think I need to be there. And after the meeting was over, one of the other people in leadership sent a message to the CEO and said, shouldn't Lauren have been in this meeting? And the CEO came to my office and said, I have to apologize to you. I didn't invite you to this meeting, and I think I should have. Really love your input. I'd love for this person to send you the notes and get your thoughts and blah, 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 blah. And I said, this is the boundary setting we were talking about, where I'm not going to come to every meeting. If you think I need to be in that, like, let's talk about that. But what value from an HR perspective do I add to rebuilding the phone tree? And he went, oh, I get it. Okay, thanks. And every time I set a boundary, every time I stood for something, my heart pounded like I was jumping off of a building, because it was a muscle I had never really flexed. I just always said yes to everything. And so the power of saying no and of having my CEO's support, and by the way, this was in the middle of me working with my own coach and even getting to the point where I was thinking about asking the CEO, right? There was a buildup there. None of that happened very fast. But the support that I was willing to receive in order to execute on these things, I would never have done that if I didn't have all of this support around me. If I didn't text my coach right afterwards and say, I didn't go to the meeting. And then they apologized for not inviting me to the meeting. And then I told them that they weren't supposed to invite me to the meeting. And it worked. And she celebrated with me, right? It was a really, in the scheme of things, a really little thing, but it felt so big because I hadn't built the muscle of saying no yet.
It's interesting how you stated it's a little thing. I think in the landscape of our professional career, it's a whole bunch of little things, right? It's saying yes to a whole bunch of little things and then your calendar's full. Or it's not saying no to one thing that leads to another thing that leads to an action item, right? And so I think if we can shift our mind to say no or to acknowledge the little things, it will keep us more on track than farther away. And so I love how you shared, just that first step of engagement.
Yeah.
And so,
and it's also, I think achievers in particular are very all or nothing, right? Like if I'm not going to go right to 40-hour work weeks and set all of these boundaries, like what's the point? Right? Because I'm an achiever. I do things, I get things done. And this seems like a really long path to getting things done. And it seems like this one little thing that I say no to isn't going to make a difference. But we're building from scratch, right? If you go to the gym for the first time in years and years and years, and you spend 3 hours at the gym, your adrenaline is going to let you do it. You're gonna be at the gym. You're gonna do all the machines. You're gonna go home. You're gonna be real proud of yourself, and then you won't be able to walk for a week, and you're never going back.
Maybe a couple of weeks,
right? Right. So it's the same thing. You're flexing these new mental muscles, these new decision-making muscles, boundary setting muscles. The word no is being introduced into your vocabulary, and not only in the scope of like, no problem, or no, don't even worry about it, or no, I've got this, but actual like just no, stop talking. These are new muscles. So you can't easily go from being a people pleaser, saying yes to everything, being ahead of deadline all of the time, straight to I've got boundaries and I work 9 to 5 and don't try to catch me outside. I'm not available. It's just not realistic. You have to build slowly so that what you build is sustainable and it makes you hungry for more.
I'd love to point out too, and this is me talking about me, is I think like a little bit of an acknowledgement of your own ego too. Like, I think for me, it was like, resist the FOMO. Like, I put myself in your position, Lauren, and I'm like, ooh, I would have totally gone to the phone tree meeting. Why? Because, well, I'm like, but they asked me to come. And so I must have something valuable to contribute that maybe I'm not even aware of. And look at me, I'm so special because I got added to the meeting, right? And I think there comes a point in time where you have to be like, I think I'm above average, but I'm not that special. Right. There are some things that like my voice really doesn't matter on this, or I don't want to do it, even though I'd be good at it, right? I think, I know similar to you, Lauren, I was very much a hand raiser. I was like, I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that, I'll do that. But some of it was ego driven because I was like, well, if I want something right, done right, I want to do it myself, right? And I think that's, you're taking away someone else's opportunity to learn and do the thing when you're like, oh, well, I'll just do it. And then like B, someone might do it better than me.
Yeah.
Fuck. I don't want to admit that, but someone might do it better than me. And at the end of the day, it's not about me. So I think like, again, I'm speaking for myself because this has been part of like my journey is just like accepting I'm not always going to be the best person to do something. But I think that was my biggest barrier and my hardest thing to get over for sure.
For me, so I'll give this one story. And so I have a really great boss, and I've been blessed with great bosses, and I've also been blessed with shitty bosses. And I tell people, Some people get so wrapped up. Oh my God, my boss, I hate them. Da 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 da. And what I do in every experience, I'm like, okay, you're teaching me how I don't want to show up. Thank you for that lesson. And so one of my really good bosses, she knows I'm a go, 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 make it look easy. Go, 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 make it look easy. And we were getting ready to get on this call, and she said, don't say anything. She said, don't even look if they call your name. Don't say anything. And so we're on this call, and action items start going. And I want to remind you, I'm in HR. This had nothing to do with HR. And that's how most of my world is, but since people know you as a goer, as a get it done, you get pulled into things because they know they can rely on you to execute. And so I remember vividly us being on this call on Zoom. And I remember me and my boss texting, and she said, look away, and, and I remember like just being quiet. And there was this emotion inside of me. Like, I just wanted to say, okay, I'll do it. Okay, I'll do it. And I was fighting my ego and fighting everything inside of me to not raise my hand. And after that, it was such a good feeling. And I remember talking to my boss and being like, oh man, like we dodged that one, and it was interesting because when you're not used to showing up in that way, it's an internal battle. And so what I want to submit for everyone's consideration is that you have to be stronger than whatever that is that you're fighting internally. Because at the end of the day, we do have a choice. We do have an option. And so of course, there are going to be times when we're not doing duties in our job description, right? But at what balance, right? And so I think there are little exercises like that, and like the exercise you shared previously, Lauren, about, no, I don't need to be in that meeting. But it's like going through those small exercises gives you the strength and the understanding that, oh, I don't need to raise my hand, and they can do this without me. And so that was my little testimony for our listeners. But Lauren, I want you to share a little bit more about how people can sustain the change, right? So yes, you make the small pivot and you keep taking baby steps and it leads to a overall change. But then how do you sustain that when you are an achiever and that's who your DNA has been for so long?
Yeah. I think you all just said it. It's an ego. And we think that we're going to damage our ego and damage our reputation if we say no, if we set a boundary, if we say, I'm going to look out for myself in this. When you shared, Lakisha, that there was a reward to you, that you were proud of yourself when you didn't volunteer and the work still got done without you, that feeds your ego too. But you had to take that one step over the threshold of courage to not volunteer. Because your ego said, volunteer, do the thing, get recognized for doing the thing, have achieved something, ego fed. What actually happened was your ego got fed because you didn't do the thing, because you got to be proud of yourself, because you had your boss's support in not volunteering for the thing. But that middle part where we are afraid that people are going to think we're useless in some aspect, that stops us from even trying. And so ego becomes like martyrdom, because like, of course I have to do this because I've done it before. And if I say no now, I'm not going to look like a team player and all of that. So the sustainability comes in, I call it a 3-step process. There are like 100 steps inside the 3 steps. So I'm not trying to make this like easy peasy, just go do that and you'll be fine. But it's a notice, decide, do pattern. And as humans, we just do, and then we do, and then we do, and then we do a little bit more. And then we're like, what else should I have done? Where did I fail? And we don't actually make decisions. We just jump into the doing. So the first step is to even notice what's happening. Do you say yes automatically? Do you raise your hand for things that are absolutely none of your business? Have you built an environment where somebody says, who's going to wake up in the morning thinking about this? And everybody turns their head to you. Have you built that? And how do you start brick by brick unbuilding that? The first thing is to notice and to say, why am I in this meeting? Why are they asking me to volunteer for this? Why am I feeling compelled to volunteer for this? So there's a little bit of noticing what happens and then asking yourself why. And one thing that I do with a lot of my clients who are hand raisers or who have trouble delegating or have trouble setting boundaries is to make a list. You can do it on paper, you can do it on your computer, but make a list that is a 2-column list. And on one side, it says my responsibility. And on the other side, it says not my responsibility. And write down every hour or so for 3 or 4 days what you just did, what you just worked on, and put it in the column, my responsibility, not my responsibility. So somebody came to me with a benefits question, answered benefits question, goes under my responsibility. Somebody came to me to ask me to participate in the phone tree meeting. I said yes, not my responsibility, but I did it, right? So you start building this list where you're noticing the things you're saying yes to and whether they were your responsibility to handle or not. And for a lot of people, they start noticing that the not my responsibility list is a lot longer than the my responsibility list. And it could be not your responsibility because it's like a whole other department that should be handling it. It could be not your responsibility because the person who should be doing that job is missing, right? We have to hire them or they're on leave.
Yeah.
And nobody else raises their hand but you. So not my responsibility. And then you get to start deciding, what am I going to start backing out of? Why am I, in these meetings? So that's number one. Number two is decide. What am I going to do about this? Can I decide on my own that I don't want to do this anymore? Do I need to talk to somebody? Do I need permission from somebody? Do I need somebody else to step in and say, Lauren's not going to be helping with this anymore? Don't ask her. Do we need to clarify my job description, right? Like, what is the decision-making process? Then we do. Then we actually execute on the things that we do. And in the doing, there are a lot of steps too. I remember when I first started not hand raising, we were already in the pandemic days. And my assignment from my coach was to sit on my hands during every meeting and keep myself on mute. And if I wanted to say yes to something, I would have to pull my hands out from under me, unmute myself and say, I'll do it. So it was extra steps. It wasn't me just already being off of mute and saying, I'll do it. I had to take actions in order to go ahead and volunteer for something that wasn't mine. And the power for all of us in all of these small steps is in the pause. Pause to notice, then decide what you're going to do, then do it.
Lauren, I have a question for you. We talked a lot about your past state, but I'd love to talk about your current state. So you are a self-identified achiever, people pleaser. Yes, you've worked to set these great boundaries for yourself, but now you're in a space where you're helping other people with this. How do you navigate carrying that emotional burden and not fall into the same trap because now you're doing something you love instead of something maybe you didn't love as much?
The people pleaser in me has the most trouble with that. And also something that I have learned in part through coaching, in part through therapy and my own personal development is that as a highly empathetic person, I also owe it to my clients to allow them to carry their emotions. I don't get it perfect every time. I had a client who was in crisis a couple of weeks ago. I thought about her all day, every day. And that's empathy. That's who and how I am. And she's okay. And I supported her. The interesting thing about working with achievers and people pleasers is that everybody's afraid to bother you. So the actual work of the work for my clients is getting comfortable calling on me. So when I work with my clients, we have formal sessions, during the month. And I'm also tell them I'm available on demand. You can reach out to me at any time. I typically answer between 9 and 9. And I'll get on a call with you or text with you or email or look over a document, whatever you need me to do. And everybody says, I don't want to bother you. And so part of the relationship building is getting them to allow themselves to rely on me. And I've yet to have a client who has abused the unlimited on-demand service because of who we all are, right? We're achievers and people pleasers. But what I have learned is I am offering my clients an opportunity to be fully who they are with me in the room in a non-judgmental way, and then to take with them what they take with them and to choose to contact me in between calls or not. And then I take care of me. And because my boundaries are good pretty much everywhere in my life, and they've gotten better and better over the last couple of years since I've built my business, I am able to put boundaries on my responsibility to my clients, which is I'm here to show up for you and with you and empower you and hold your hand as you grow and develop. And also, you are ultimately responsible for and empowered to all of your decisions, however you want to do this, however quickly or slowly, big bites, small bites, you get to choose. And for me, the biggest growth has been in understanding the power of choice. That if my client isn't going to do something, that's their choice. If they need to sit on a call with me and cry for the entire hour, that's okay with me. And we can set up an extra call so that you don't feel like you lost time to crying, right? Which is always my MO. Oh, I had all of this emotion. I wasted my time, which is, our own people-pleasing tendencies and our own perfectionist tendencies. But I am here to provide a landing place for achievers and people pleasers, and then to let them go and let them do what they will do and move as quickly or as slowly as they want to move. And the beauty of me not being inside their company with them is that I don't have to look out for everybody. When I worked inside of a company and I had to think of what's going to benefit the employee, what's going to benefit the company, what's the manager going to respond with, what are they going to be thinking about, how does this serve or not serve our client base, it was too many things to focus on. So what I love about what I do now is I get to just only focus on the individual who is my client and help them figure out what is best for them in this moment and what they are capable of taking on between this call and our next call. And then they get to come to me and celebrate the successes or tell me what they didn't get to or tell me why they didn't get to do something or that something felt too big. And I get to support them as they grow in whatever way works for them. And I think that for me has been the most powerful boundary, is being able to say, I've done my best work and I'm here for these clients when they need whatever they need next. And they get to be empowered to do it or not do it.
I love how you really summed up kind of being in HR inside of an organization, worrying about the customer, worrying about the manager, worrying about the employee, worrying about the rest of the organization, and it's so fascinating to me that so many people in society really don't understand the position of HR and all of the many balls that they're juggling throughout the day. And so you said that and summed it up in a perfect way. So thank you for that, Lauren.
Yeah. And I think it exists all around. And I don't mean to say that if you're in HR, sorry, it sucks to be you, I got out. It's because I did do that boundary setting while I was working for the last organization I was working inside of. And most of my clients don't become entrepreneurs. That's not who I work with. I work with people typically who want to be happier in their corporate lives and want to be doing something that they're really passionate about, not doing something that they just sort of like fell into and this is the way it is. But in thinking about all of those aspects, especially if you're in some sort of caretaking position, whether it's HR or you're a C-suite leader or you're responsible for project management and you have to think about all of the people all the time, it's that same philosophy of like, what is in your power and control? What wisdom or direction can you dole out? And then learning to let go so that you're not always holding on to everybody's responsibility all of the time. And all of that is practice. Everything we're talking about today is practice. I once had a coach who said, it's a practice, not a perfect. And that has really stuck with me because we aim for perfection. We want to get it right every time. And it's really about taking small steps, small gestures to separate from the things that are bringing us all of the emotion. So if you're in this middle place, which HR is a middle place, if you're in this middle place, what is your responsibility? Who are you looking out for? And then how does that impact all of the other pieces? Is it the company? Is it the client? Is it the employee? Who does it impact? What's the fairest thing to do? And then you do those things and then you let them go because you're doing the best you can. And that is the best you can do.
So powerful, Lauren. Thank you.
So powerful because I think as a society, we strive for perfection, right? And so how do we give ourselves grace in knowing that perfection is not attainable? It's not realistic. And to even attempt to operate in that sphere all the time is detrimental to your well-being. And so I think that's wonderful what you shared. And so we always like to kind of close things out with 3 practical tips that you could give our listeners. And so I know we spoke a lot about achievers and people pleasers, but maybe these practical tips may be for a listener who's not an achiever or a people pleaser.
Yeah, I think one tip is that you always have a choice. We get ourselves into situations, or the way things go gets us into situations where we feel like this is just it. This is just how it is. And we always have a choice. It's not always a practical choice, right? Well, I don't want to go to work today because work is breaking me. I'm just going to quit today. Rage quit, as Megan put it earlier. And Megan, you didn't rage quit. You thought about rage quitting, and then you did a little bit of planning, and then you kind of rage quit. But you had done some planning before you did that, right?
I did do planning. I did some planning.
Right. But that was such a great example of that notice, decide, do, right? Which is the next tip is the power is in the pause. The power is in pausing, noticing what's happening, making a conscious decision about what you're going to do, and then doing it. And then my third tip is, in between deciding and doing, ask for support. Ultimately, I think, and like, of course I do, I'm an executive coach. Ultimately, I think you should have a coach. I think everybody should have a coach. I have not had a coach since I got a coach. And it's been different coaches at different times for different things. But there is so much value in having a person who is undeniably there to support you and your growth and understands where you are and where you're starting from. So it's know you have a choice, go through the notice, decide, do, and ask somebody to support you. Even if it's like so tiny, you can start with somebody in your own company who you trust and say, can I run something by you? I'm thinking about doing this tiny little thing. I'm thinking about starting to leave work at 5, the way Lakisha did. What do you think the repercussions would be? Here's what I'm worried about. What do you think about that? And that's where the constructive versus commiserating friend or mentor comes in, don't go to your complainy friend. Don't go to your friend who's going to be like, yeah, this really sucks. It's never going to change, right? Because that's the person who's going to convince you don't have a choice. That notice, decide, do isn't for anybody. That asking for help is dumb because nobody can help. So go to your constructive friend, go to your constructive mentor, to your manager if they're someone you have a good relationship with as a start, and just like test something low risk. And notice then what happens when you've asked for that help. And all of these fears that sit at that threshold between doing something and not doing something, where you're afraid they're going to be like, that's a dumb thing to ask, or don't do that, you're going to get in so much trouble, or nobody acts like that. None of those things usually happen, right? Those are things that spin in our brains, but they don't actually happen. And then get braver about asking for more help. And if you're ready to get like very brave, then you get a coach. And that's somebody you can dump all the stuff out on and really organize it and really come to where are the small places that you can start to make change so that you can eventually go after what you actually want.
Well, great stuff. Thank you again, Lauren. I have to make a little pun here to tee you up into your exit, but I could talk to you all day. So if people want to hear more from you, if they want to work with you, if they want to follow you, how can they find you?
Thank you for asking that. Well, your pun is delightful because I could talk to you all day. And I also have a podcast called I Could Talk to You All Day, which is a podcast for leaders who are also humans, which is, I think, most of us. And that podcast is with a partner, John Spears, who's also an executive coach and a corporate executive leader. And we talk about all of the things, boundaries and self-kindness and growth and executive presence and all the BS that happens in the work world. And that's on all the platforms. Our host is a Spotify platform, and that's where we prefer you listen, but you can listen on whatever platform you listen on. And the easiest way to find me is fineasatrap.com. We'll take you to a free tool that I have, which is a Fine as a Trap checklist, where you can sort of walk through how things are in your professional life and assess, is it great? Is it terrible? Is it fine? What does fine really mean? And if you can spell my name, Lauren Lefkowitz, you can find my Linktree, which is Linktree/Lauren Lefkowitz.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. Listeners, I hope you tune into Lauren's podcast because it is a delight. Her and her partner have a very fun vibe. If you like this podcast, you will absolutely like that podcast. So thank you, Lauren, for telling everybody where they could go to find you. And gosh, I love this conversation. There were so many valuable tips that you were able to relay to our listeners and to me. I'm not over here like maybe a little emotional and like self-reflective right now. Certainly not, because that would be kind of weird. So
yes. I mean, there were so many points, Lauren, that you were speaking to me. It was almost like I had a mirror up in front of my face. And so thank you for that.
Thank you for inviting me here.
Yeah. Thank you, Lauren. All right. Until next time, listeners, goodbye.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. The views expressed on this show are based on our personal opinions and should not be taken as legal advice. Contact an attorney for that.
Our theme music and sound was produced by Equilibrium. Our artwork and logo was created by Jillian Blanco. We are an independently run podcast. If you like our show, please rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to share your story or expertise, email us at stories@offlineandunfiltered.com. We can't wait to hear from you.